Come on, get in. There we go. This, can I get rid of this? Okay. The book I'm going to be talking about is my book that focuses on Mono Lake, the Great Salt Lake, and the Salton Sea, which are three terminal lakes in the western United States that are shrinking due to political short-sightedness, the drought, and climate change. And this is a boxed book, 8.5 by 11. It's got 96 pages, 64 black and white photographs that I took, an introduction by Sandra Phillips, who is the photography curator emeritus with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, as well as essays by Bonnie Baxter, who is the director of the Great Salt Lake Institute, and Alita Cantor, who's a professor of geography at Portland State University. These two essays focus on the environmental issues at the three lakes. The clamshell box contains a hardcover book, excuse me, of 96 pages. It's signed and numbered, as is the included 8.5 and 11-inch archival print that's printed on Hahnemühle bamboo rag. I use the bamboo because it's environmentally less destructive than regular paper, and because it has a wonderful texture. The edition size of this book is 100. And we'll start with Mono Lake. Mono Lake is well known for its incredible tufa, which line the shore, particularly evident on the south shore where this was taken. And the tufa have become more and more evident as the water level goes down. And the reason the water level is going down is, again, because of the long-standing drought here in the West, climate change, which is heating up the air, and so the lake dries up faster. And also, Los Angeles has been taking water from the lake since 1941. They were told to cut back in the 70s, but they're still taking water. I climbed up to the top of Panem Crater, which is beside Mono Lake, so I could get a full shot of the lake. And you can see over on the right-hand side that the shore is receding drastically. Again, here's a close-up of the tufa on the south shore of the lake. And they're really quite incredible. You know, there's something very mysterious about them. But each time I've gone, they seem to be more in evidence because as the lake water goes down, the tufa are more exposed since they develop underwater. They're also quite majestic, as you can see here. I love this with the rough forms and then the slowly undulating water below. The last time that I went to Mono Lake, I decided I would be a little more adventurous this time and decided that I would hike up to the top of Black Point, which is a 500-foot mound of volcanic ash, sort of the texture, consistency of sand. And I thought, well, it'll take about half an hour to get to the top so I can get into the fissures, which were formed when there was very active volcanic activity going on in this basin, which is a caldera basically. And did make it up, but it took 3 hours because you stepped down on the sand and then slipped back 2 steps. So it was arduous to say the least. And of course, once I got into the fissures, I realized that, you know, I really didn't belong there because I'm claustrophobic. But it was beautiful. Climbing down only took an hour because we slid most of the way. And I did make a point of stopping halfway down to take a photograph of the islands where the seagulls that end up here in San Francisco, ultimately, and other areas along the coast of California, the eggs are hatched here at Mono Lake and also in the Great Salt Lake. And then they migrate. But it used to be that the coyotes would have to swim over to the islands. Now they can just walk over because of the water level. This is the main source of water that goes into Mono Lake. It's the Levining Creek. And note that I say creek, not river. This is a very slow-moving, shallow body of water that feeds the lake. And Los Angeles, as I said, is still taking water from this and from the water table of this area. So this is at the shore of the lake. Fairly pathetic. And then here's surviving seagulls that are on the shore of the lake before they fly off to the coast of California. And then this is a tufa, which was carved out and used as a warming hut during the time that Bodie was at its peak as a gold mining town in the Eastern Sierras. Some enterprising white men decided that they would make some money off of the population in Bodie, and they would do farming on the shores of Mono Lake, which was absolutely ludicrous given the altitude and the freezing temperatures up here. But they carved out tufa and put fire pits inside so they could stay warm while they were doing their farming. Crazy. But with all the negative and sad history of Mono Lake, it's still a place that I consider one of the most beautiful places I've ever been anywhere. It's absolutely glorious. Our next stop along the path of these 3 toxic lakes is the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea, in its present form, was created in 1905 when pipes bringing water from the Colorado River to the Imperial Valley failed because of poor construction and flooded this basin, creating a 400 square mile lake within 2 years. And at that point, you know, it was fine. The water was relatively clean. It had just flowed into this area, but there's no outlet for the water and there's no river flowing into the basin. And so slowly but surely, the water of the Salton Sea, like Mono Lake, became shallower and shallower and shallower. The Salton Sea was a very hot, happening resort in the 50s and 60s with a lot of celebrity types coming from Los Angeles and Palm Springs to play here. But in the 70s, the lake became cluttered on the shore with dead fish and dead birds. And of course, people then scattered. Okay, this is, all right. Technology is not perfect. Okay, this is now the shore by the resort, just chunks of cement from what was once a rather attractive resort. I like this image a lot, though. I think it has its own beauty with the roughness of the stones against the mountains in the background. Along the east shore of the lake and up by the old resort are the remains and somewhat active date palm farms. I wouldn't eat Majul dates that came from here, though, given the toxic air and water. But I think all the chaos on the floor of the farm against the very linear lines of palms is kind of wonderful. This is at the south end of the Salton Sea by what's called the Red Hill Marina. And I'd shot these trees before, but the last time I went, all the ground below them and around was all dug up in these very high trenches. I don't know at this point what they're going to be doing with this land down here since it's so dry, and I don't know. I just the way they carved it up doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, it looks like change is afoot, which hopefully is a good thing. Because nearby, this is the old boat launch dock. And as you can see, the water is probably 2 miles away. So things need to somehow change if they can. Because the south end of the Salton Sea is also a major migratory bird landing site. All three of these lakes, Mono Lake, the Great Salt Lake, and Salton Sea, are all very important to migratory birds. January 2023, we had a series of storms, atmospheric rivers they were called, that did bring a lot of water to this area and created a lot of mud, but there's still the ongoing drought. So this was a temporary situation at best. And the migratory birds, some of which are very exotic and wonderful, are very dependent on having clean water and the ability to get to the creatures that live in clean water to survive. One area along the Salton Sea that brings a smile is Bombay Beach. Bombay Beach, the settlement is rather depressing, as you can see from this image. But at the beach itself, every year for about a week, artists from all over, including Europe, Asia, come to Bombay Beach and create sculptures. And This one is particularly valid for this area. It's a carved metal pelican up on top and a fish hanging from the sign, "Bring us back," since they all died. And then this is a favorite sculpture of mine. This is what I call Straw Man, and he's about 12 feet tall, actually, and just, wonderfully spontaneous. And I hope next time I go, he'll still be there. And I think that the thing that's going to end up saving the Salton Sea, so its idiosyncratic beauty and uniqueness can survive despite politicians getting in the way of getting anything done, is the fact that there are about five, last time I counted 5 thermal energy plants down at the south shore of the lake. And they are drilling way into the core of the earth to bring up heat to create clean energy. A byproduct of creating this clean energy is the fact that all sorts of materials, minerals are brought up from the core of the earth. And the one that's most relevant to our lifestyle today is lithium. So we have a source for iPhones, et cetera, which will bring a lot of money to this area. And hopefully the people that benefit from this money will put some of it into saving the migratory bird sanctuary and convincing the farmers not to let their fertilizer run into the lake, et cetera. The last stop is the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And I have to say, I wasn't really looking forward to going to the Great Salt Lake. It just seemed like it was going to be really boring. But I was in for a very, very pleasant surprise. It was really very exciting and very interesting. Part of that reason was because our first stop was what's called Antelope Island, which was in the middle of what was the Great Salt Lake. It's now surrounded by the cement-like playa, not by water. And what you're seeing in the background is not water. That's all just the cement-like sludge. So we crossed this causeway that you see on the left-hand side and got onto the lake, onto the island, and hiked up to get some elevation to look over the playa. And again, all of that is just this viscous mud, cement-like mud, not water. The joy of going to this island was that there were bison on the island. In 1893, some very good-hearted people put 12 bison on Antelope Island to try to make up for the fact that white men moving across the United States, killing Indians, trying to starve them by killing the bison, decided they would try to undo the damage to any extent they could. And they put these bison on the island. The 12 bison are now 500 bison. And it was quite wonderful because there was no fence between me and them. And if I didn't disturb them, if I moved slowly, I could get close enough to really get some good shots of them. And technology skipped one of the images. I wanted to show you this because this is the terrain of Antelope Island. It's a desert. And yet Utah has the 5th highest per capita usage of water in the United States. It's insane, insane. As you drive along the freeways outside of Salt Lake City, there's billboards all over the place. Come to Utah, come to Utah. All these new suburbs, new industry, come live with us. And they all take water with impunity from the Bear River, which is the main source of water for the Great Salt Lake. It's just insane. The island used to be a ranch, and there's these wonderful remnants of ranch life on the island. And if you can see in the distance, there's a fence going parallel to the island, keeping what were the animals, farm animals then, onto the island and not letting them allowed to swim off into the distance. And then these are some tracks crossing these viscous cement-like sludge, the playa, probably of the bison, but it could be coyotes. I saw 3 coyotes within the first 15 minutes I was on the island. Or it could be the antelope. It's named Antelope Island, but I only saw one. The island was a ranch. We saw that. Okay, this is leaving the island. And these are the birds, the migratory birds, trying to find any food or water in the sludge. And then this is south of the Great Salt Lake. This is this copper smeltering plant. And this is a great example of governmental lack of know-how or brains. They made the plant raise this pipe up by another 50%, which only meant that the toxins that came out of the pipe took longer to hit the earth, and they spread farther afield. Oh God, now it's doing this again. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. This is a nearby marina at the Great Salt Lake, and you can see the water is receding. This was the sailboat docks, and the water is leaving. And a nearby marina, the water is gone. And a good part of the problem with the Great Salt Lake is also the fact that farmers have grandfathered in farming rights, and they're still farming to this day alfalfa right on the shore of the lake. Alfalfa takes as much water as almonds. So, you know, it's just ridiculous to be farming this in a desert. And this is the wetlands of the Bear River, which is the main source of water for the lake. And I don't know if you can see, you can just barely see the mountains in the background because it's so hazy in this basin, which was made even more so because this was in January of 2023, and there were all the fires in the Sierras. The smoke blew over into Utah and made the situation even worse. And then this is the ironic image that I took, because when my husband and I went to the Danube River Delta several years ago to go to the wetlands that were on the Black Sea shore, I was so horrified that this beautiful wetlands area with all just thousands of migratory birds was overrun with the farmers' cows, and being an uptight, self-righteous American, I was thinking to myself, oh, those Romanians, they're so stupid. Don't they know that it's not good to have cows in with the poor migratory birds? And here we are in Utah. It's the same thing. This area was just overrun with herds of cows. And you can see the pelicans and small seabirds sharing this bit of water with this small black cow. So, and then the last image of my presentation is, again, the Great Salt Lake, but this is the northern shore. And in the middle, there's the famous railroad causeway that cuts right smack up the middle of the lake. They decided they would save time and money by not going around the lake, but rather right smack through it. And what happened is everything on one side of the lake, the water, turned bright red. On the other side of the causeway, it all was green, because the right-hand side of the lake nearest to you looking at the image was more toxin filled, because the water was going down and it wasn't being flushed by the green water on the other side of the causeway. And of course, this became quite the tourist attraction, seeing this bright red water on one side of the causeway and then the green water on the other side. But of course, it was just a disaster for the birds, who couldn't eat the brine shrimp because they were being killed by the toxins. And ironically, it was also bad news for local industry, because farming the brine shrimp out of the lake was a major source of money for people living in Utah. So that is the end of my presentation about these three really unique, quite wonderful lakes that are under duress. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
What drew you to this project?
Well, I'm very attracted to landscape as opposed to people as a means of practicing my art. But I also thought it should have a purpose. And I started doing sort of ecological projects in San Francisco, and then I decided I wanted to go farther afield and take on something that might have more meaning, more importance. And the reason I shoot in black and white, I should say, is at one point in my work career, before I owned my own gallery, I worked at a gallery that showed the work of Ansel Adams and Paul Strand and Imogen Cunningham and Jerry Uelsman and others, pretty incredible people. And I was just drawn particularly to Paul Strand and Ansel Adams' work. And so I wanted to follow in that the black and white, because I think if you strip out color, it seems to have more poetry, because you're stripping off the top layer of reality to get to the core of things.
Okay, Jane, where can we get your project, your book?
Through me, it's self-published.
Okay, that's what we need to know.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything for Jane?
I just want to thank her for sharing this beautiful work. It really
Absolutely.
is,
Yes.
it's so interesting and it's so, oh dear. Okay, I'm messing up technology. Bye, Jane. I think it was great.
Well, thank you. Is that Betty?
We have a question.
Oh, that's weird.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jane. We'll kick it over to Bob now and Shadows of Emmett Till. So Bob, it's all yours.
Okay. Give me a couple of minutes here. Shadows of Emmett Till started out as a project based in the Mississippi Delta, and it has evolved to, it's actually two books in one. Part of it is my contemporary photographs of the Mississippi Delta, and part of it is archival photographs, along with essays and poems and some maps. I originally went to the Delta in 2014 on a photo trip. I didn't know anything about that part of the world and wanted to learn something. And as time passed, as you'll see in the photographs, it evolved eventually into a book. For those of you who might not be familiar with the area, this is the middle part of the United States. Chicago's up here, and this green area down in the northwest portion of Mississippi is called the Mississippi Delta. The tour I was on started out in Clarksdale. This picture really tells a lot about the city. It's the birthplace of the blues. There are a number of juke joints and blues places in Clarksdale and all along the Blues Highway. Unfortunately, a lot of Clarksdale and many of the towns in the area are very dilapidated and in poor repair. Excuse me, there is no longer segregation in Mississippi, but there's is separation. These are pictures of when segregation was present. The photograph on the left is of a theater that was frequented by the Black population, and on the right side is the white theater. Behind that white theater is this, still standing today, and it's the entrance for the Black patrons. They had to go up this stairway up here and had to sit in the balcony. They weren't allowed in the rest of the theater at the time. Now the inside of it is falling in and is dilapidated. These sorts of houses are common in the area, so-called shotgun houses. For those that might not be familiar with the term, it originated because you could open the front door and see all the way to the back and shoot a shotgun, so it would go through without hitting anything. Some of you may have seen the movie called The Green Book. This was a popular book for Negro travelers in the 40s, 50s, and up into the 60s. Black people were not allowed to stay in many of the places that white people were. So this was a book to give them information on restaurants, gas stations, and other places where they could go and get their needs taken care of. This is the Riverside Hotel in Clarksdale, was one of the hotels at the time. It's still standing and occasionally takes guests. To give you an idea about what it was like in Emmett Till's time, this was Jim Crow times, when a Black man or Blacks were not allowed to interact with whites at all. If a Black man was walking down the street, he was to get off the sidewalk and not look a white woman in the eye. Colored waiting rooms were common at that time, as were the water fountains. There were black and white water fountains rather than being just one. This is a billiard hall that was in Memphis. These are pictures that are scattered from all over the South. They typically had their own places where they went for recreation. This was a juke joint just outside Clarksdale. This man on the left is an overseer of a plantation. The plantations were, the workers were almost entirely Black people. They would go out into the cotton fields with these great big sacks, and they would have to pick the cotton by hand and then bring it in to the overseer. These are sharecroppers that were common at the time. There were some white sharecroppers, and this picture on the right was taken by Dorothea Lang. This is the same woman that's in the very famous migrant worker picture. Lynching, unfortunately, was common in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. This sign hung outside the NAACP office in New York City. This was a typical KKK gathering where they often would burn crosses as a way to scare off the Black people. This is a photograph that was fairly common in the 20s and 30s. There would be big gatherings when they were going to lynch someone. And they took pictures of the person or persons that were lynched, put it on postcards, and then white people would send it to each other. They finally outlawed that, but when they just figured out a workaround, and they put the postcards in an envelope and sent them around. This is the courthouse in Sumner, Mississippi, where the trial took place related to Emmett Till. The reason I'm showing it is this is a Confederate soldier. This still stands out in front. There's an American flag, and at the bottom is the old Mississippi flag. It was changed fairly recently, but until that time, the Confederate Battle of Saltire was a part of the Mississippi flag. This was taken on a farm 2 or 3 years ago in Mississippi. They are still flying the Confederate flag. This is a picture of Emmett Till and his mother. At this time, it was not long before Emmett took his trip to Mississippi. Mamie was in her early 30s, about 33, and Emmett about 14. For those of you who might not know the story, Emmett was a 14-year-old boy, and when he was 14, he went to Mississippi to visit his relatives. He went with an uncle and one of his cousins. A short time after he arrived, they went to this old country store. It was run by a white couple, and they catered to the Black people that worked on the plantations there. While in that store, he supposedly was in there for only about a minute, he met a lady named Carolyn Bryant and purchased something from her. When he left, when the lady's husband came home, she claimed that Emmett had made a pass at her. So her husband and brother-in-law went to where Emmett was staying, which is this building here on the left. It was the home of Moses Wright, his uncle. And they kidnapped Emmett, beat him severely, shot him in the head, tied a 75-pound cotton gin fan around his neck, and threw him in the river. This was the bed where Emmett was sleeping on the night where he was kidnapped, about 2 o'clock in the morning. It's his cousin, Maurice. This is a building on what at the time was called the Sturdivant Plantation. And from the time he was kidnapped, he was taken to several different locations. He was brought to this part of the old barn, and it was here that he was beaten. This was witnessed by at least 3 Black people who were working on the plantation at the time. I'll warn you now that I'm going to show a couple of pictures that are difficult to look at. You may want to look away, but they're part of the story. The photograph on the left is of Emmett after he had been taken from the river, and this is a picture when he was in the morgue. As you can see, he was beaten beyond recognition. The only way that they could recognize him was by a ring that he was wearing, which had belonged to his father, and had his father's initials on it. This is the first time that Mamie saw Emmett when he was brought back to Chicago. When she learned that he had been killed, she demanded that Emmett's body be brought back to Chicago for burial. These are photographs of the funeral. Estimates vary as terms of how many people attended, but it certainly was in the thousands. This is a picture of the interior of the Roberts Temple where the funeral took place. You can see that there was a glass-topped coffin. Mamie demanded that his body be viewed by the public so that everyone could see what was done to her son. This is another picture of the courthouse in Sumner, Mississippi, and Tallahatchie County, where the trial took place. This was a sign that was outside town at the time of the trial. White people were not allowed in this town. There were a lot of Black journalists, as well as Mamie and some of her family that came for the trial, but they had to stay in a nearby Black town called Mount Bayou, which is still in existence. This is the interior of the courthouse. They have redone the interior so it looks just like it did at the time of the trial. This was taken a couple of years ago. You can see this is where the jury sat at the time of the Milam Bryant trial. This man here is Sheriff Strouder, who was one of the people who found Emmett in the river, and he was giving instructions to the people in the jury. Oh, sorry. These are the two people that were on trial, the guys that were primary guys that were involved in a kidnapping and murder. This is J.W. Bryant and Roy Bryant. Roy is the husband of Carolyn Bryant. This is a picture of the interior of the courtroom at the time of the trial. It's significant for a lot of reasons. As you can see, it was a packed house. It was in summer. It was really hot. There was no air conditioning. The Black people were not allowed to sit down. They had to stand in the back, except for these folks up here who were the journalists. And they were required to sit over at the side of the courtroom around a small table. You can see the camera here of one of the photographers. This is a very famous portrait. The man in the picture who's pointing is Moses Wright. He's the uncle of Emmett Till. This is the first time that a Black man stood up in a Southern state and accused a white man of doing something. The judge at the time forbade photographs during the trial, but a Black photographer was able to capture this image. This is a small town nearby Sumner called Glendora. And I'll show you a picture in a minute of the bridge from which he was thrown that's just outside this town. This is the 75-pound cotton gin fan that was tied around Emmett's neck. This is the Black Bayou Bridge, and it was from here that Emmett's body was thrown into the river. This is a location called Grayball's Landing. It's not too far from the Black Bayou Bridge, but it's thought to be the place where Emmett's body was found. As you probably know, rivers tend to change course over time, so it's not possible to know exactly where that took place. Emmett's lynching and murder was in 1955. It's a picture of the two defendants during the court session. They are sitting beside their wives. This lady is Carolyn Bryant. She was said to be a beauty queen in her younger years. Also of interest, you can't see here, but the children of these couples were also in the courtroom at the time, and they were allowed to run up and down the chairs and were sitting on their dad's laps while all this was taking place. Jet Magazine was a Black publication at the time, and it was the first to publish images from the time of the trial. The white press did not cover this to any extent at the time. The trial took place in September. There was a 12-man all-white jury. They took about an hour to deliberate, and they found that the defendants were not guilty. About 4 months after that, in January, a man named William Bradford Huey came to the Mississippi Delta and interviewed the two men along with their attorney. In that interview, they admitted to kidnapping and killing Emmett, but nothing could be done because of the double jeopardy law. I've met some very interesting people that piqued my interest in this whole topic. The man on the left is named John Whitten. He is the son of one of 5 defense attorneys. There were 5 attorneys in the little town where the trial took place. Nobody wanted to serve as defense attorneys, so the judge told them that they all had to serve. John is a very conservative guy. His feeling is that there's way too much attention paid to events around the trial, and if they would just stop talking about it, it would all go away. The picture on the right is the interior, one of the rooms in his home. He has lots of guns. He also even has a tank, an army tank. Mississippi is a very red state. This was taken during Trump's election, or when he was elected. The Black people in particular revere the Kennedy brothers. This is Robert. They also revered his brother John. Violence is a big part of life in the Mississippi Delta still. This is a photograph of a window in a barber shop in Clarksdale. Clarksdale has one of the highest per capita murder rates in Mississippi. The picture on the left is Emmett when he was a child. This is him, and the guy on this side is Wheeler Parker. Wheeler is the cousin of Emmett Till. He came down on the train with Emmett when he came to Mississippi. He's now a minister in a small church just outside Chicago, and he spends a good bit of his time going around and telling people about Emmett and all the circumstances surrounding his killing. This is an abandoned cotton gin in a little town called Money. There used to be cotton gins in almost every little town down there, but now most of them, not all, but most are closed down. This is what remains of Bryant's store. This is a place where Emmett met Carolyn Bryant. There has been a lot of discussion about renovating it, but it's never happened. This is an aerial view of the little town of Money. This building right here is the cotton gin that I just showed you, and this is where the old store stands. But as you can see, it's a little more than a wide place in the road. Tutwiler is a nearby town. When his body was found, Emmett's body was taken here because there was a Black embalmer there. At that time, if you were white, you were embalmed by a white person, and Black people were taken care of by a Black embalmer. This is an old hearse that was I found in the ruins of that Tutwiler mortuary. This is the same map that I showed you earlier, but it'll give you a little bit of an idea about where all this happened. The red towns are the ones that had some relationship to Emmett's time in Mississippi. It was only a few days. Excuse me. Now, as I as I said, I went there on a photo trip, and I became very interested in it. And as time evolved, I went back about a dozen times, usually for a week, sometimes 2 weeks. And I began to make photographs or prints of the things that I had seen and captured. And after I did that, I was encouraged to go to portfolio reviews. At one of the portfolio reviews, I met this lady. Her name's Alexa Becker, and she works for a publishing company called Care for Log, who are the ones who published my book. They're based in Heidelberg. You can see down here the book as it's opened with its two parts. On the right-hand side are my photographs, and on the left are the archival images. Mississippi has long had a problem with flooding. This is a, pardon me, this is a cotton field on the left. This is a small town called Rodney, a little bit south of Vicksburg, and one of the old abandoned churches there. This is also in Rodney. There are very few people, I think about 3 or 4 that live in Rodney, but because of the flooding problem, they put their trailer on an elevated stand so that they can stay there year round if they choose to do so. This is the Brooklyn Chapel, just outside Greenwood. It's been there about 100 years. Some of you might recognize it. It was in the opening scene of a movie called The Help. The interior of the church. I don't know whether you all have ever been to a Black religious service. Baptist churches are the most common ones there, but they're very different from white services. And white services, like the church I grew up in, people are usually very reserved, and they get up at special times during the service if they're reading a Bible verse or sometimes when they're singing. But the Black parishioners are up and down throughout the service, and they'll often crying out, "Hey, brother, say it again," singing all the time. This is the left-hand side is a shop. This lady rents dresses primarily to young Black women for special occasions. On the right, this is taken in a dress shop, very typical of the beautiful hats that the women wear to church. This is a barber shop on the left. This is the man that runs it. It's a gathering place for everybody in Clarksdale, particularly in the Black community. It opens about 6:30 in the morning and it opens till 10 at night. People do get their hair cut there, but they also use it as a hangout place where they can gather and just talk. Crystal Cafe is in Greenwood, Mississippi. It used to be just for white people, but now Black and white people go there, though interestingly, they tend to go at different times. The reason they go at different times is largely on Sunday, is particularly because they have their church services at different times and they get out at different times. But family events are a big deal, particularly for the Black people in the population. This was a Father's Day event. You may remember that there's a Supreme Court decision called Brown versus the Board of Education, which was supposed to desegregate schools. To get around this, in Mississippi, they set up what are called seg schools or segregation schools. The Black kids go to public schools and the white people go to schools like this. They've been forced to, the white seg schools have been forced to admit some Black students, but they often are those who are very athletically inclined or are very bright. About a year ago, I heard a presentation where there was a young Black woman who was a freshman in college. She had gone to a Black public school. And when she was a senior, they took her around to some of the other schools in the state. And she was quite astonished to see that in the ladies' room, they had paper towels and soap for the girls. They didn't have that in her school. The schools are, as I said, separated to some extent, but the young people play just like kids every place. This young man is from a poor white family just outside Crowder. He's had many run-ins with the school principal and finally was expelled when he kicked the principal in the shin rather than trying to help him to learn to deal with troubling times. They kicked him out of school. This is an old above ground swimming pool near this boy's house. Mississippi is the home of the blues. There's a road that goes right down the middle of the Mississippi Delta, and there are many places where the blues are played. This is Ground Zero, owned in part by Morgan Freeman. It's in Clarksdale. They play cards, dominoes, pool, and of course there's lots of music. These photographs were both taken in Ground Zero. And this is from a juke joint called Reds, which has been there forever. Unfortunately, Reds just passed away not long ago. These are typical of cotton fields that you see in the Mississippi Delta. Most of the work in the cotton fields is done by machinery, but there are still sometimes when you see workers out in the field. This is Rosa Parks. You may remember the story about her. The trial, took place in September. In December, Rosa was in Montgomery, and she famously said she was on a bus and was told to go to the back of the bus, and she refused to do so. And after the fact, she said that one of the reasons that she didn't was that she was thinking about Emmett. Unfortunately, there are lots of parallels with what's going on in Mississippi and some of the other places in the United States today, parallels with George Floyd and many others. The story of Emmett is interesting because almost every year something new comes up, a new twist or turn. This is the basement of the courthouse in Greenwood. Last year, someone went there, a person who's very interested in Emmett Till history and has done a documentary on him named Keith Beauchamp went there. And they found this. This is a warrant. The warrant was for J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant. They're the two men that were put on trial. It was also for Carolyn Bryant. And as you'll see on this left side, the warrant was never served to Carolyn Bryant. And there's a note that says that the sheriff says that he was unable to find her in his county. This statement was also made that she has some small children, so they didn't want to bother her. There are some positive things about the story. There's now a national monument for Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie. She was 33 at the time of this terrible event in 1955. It's President Biden, and this is Wheeler Parker, who's Emmett's cousin. A little bit about the book. A lot of the preparation for the book was done by Zoom after I had that initial conversation with Alexa Becker. First just conversations and then an agreement that CARE would publish the book for me. After it was completed, I had the opportunity to go to Heidelberg to see what's termed being on press. This is one of two printers that were used. There was one for color and one for black and white, but I had never seen printers like this. They're really huge printers. Each one of these light gray areas is a big vat of one of the primary colors that's used for printing. This man has been working at this publisher for about 40 years, and he plays the machine kind of like an organ. The pictures are printed on large sheets of paper, about 8 pieces. When they come out, they put them on this stand and look at them, and he'll say, well, there's a little bit too much red in this picture, or this one needs a little bit more green. He punches these buttons down here and they run off some more pictures until they finally get to a point where everybody agrees. And after each page is made, all the people that are involved have to sign off on every page. This is just a picture. There were 1,500 copies of my book made, and this is one of the big pages from it. These were the primary people involved with the book. This lady is Magdalena Soleil, is the photographer that took me to the Delta in the first place and served as the editor for my book. And this is Klaus Kehr, who's the publisher, the president of the publishing company. One of the fun things I got to do was go to Paris Photo, not this last year, but the previous one, where Kehr had a book stall, and I got to present my book and make some signings there. The last current thing I'm working on is a book box, similar to the one that Jane showed. There are a lot of people that make book boxes. Mine is made by a lady named Lisa Hersey, who lives up in Massachusetts. But the book is on the inside, and then there's also a portfolio which has 3 small photographs. Well, I thank Michael for inviting me, and thank you all for seeing through my presentation. I appreciate having the opportunity and be happy to any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Bob. It was great. Anybody have anything for Bob?
Well, I'm just so impressed. This is Sally Harris, Mike and Sally Harris, and we were in Mississippi with Bob. I think it was that first trip, and I just am so amazed that you really took that whole idea and really delved into it. It's just, you really came out with a spectacular book.
I'll agree with that.
Thank you much. One of the fun things about going to the Mississippi Delta is I got to see a lot of interesting things, but I got to meet some very interesting people, and have been able to continue with that friendship with Mike and Clay and many others.
It's a special place.
Over the years, we've done several projects that Kehr Verlag has published, and they've all been fantastic. Where can we find your book, Bob? Bob?
You know, I think he froze and he may have had to.
He left us. Well, we'll sit here for a minute. But thanks everybody for coming today. While we're waiting for him, I'll give you a plug for next month. On March 16, Fall Line Press is going to come spend an hour with us and talk about several of their new projects.